I woke up with my face pressed against the cold hardwood floor, and I knew immediately something was wrong. And look, it wasn't just the splitting headache or the dried blood crusted on my knuckles. I could have written those off as a really bad night out. No, it was the silence. Downtown New York is never this silent. No sirens, no shouting, not even the constant hum of 1,000 AC units. Just this heavy, unnatural quiet that settles in your bones. I pushed myself up, and that's when I saw my respirator on the coffee table. The filter readout was at 70%, and just like that, the memories started coming back, not in a clean sequence, but in jagged, dangerous pieces. The news alerts that wouldn't stop. The riots spreading faster than anyone could contain them, and the way people's eyes would go glassy and empty right before they lunged. I must have barricaded the door at some point because the couch was shoved tight against it, and my hands were raw from dragging furniture. But the scary part, I had no idea how long I'd been out. My sidearm was on the kitchen counter, one live round left, just one. Most people don't realize how fast ammunition actually goes in real life. In movies, the heroes got a bottomless clip, right? But in reality, you burn through rounds trying to hit a moving target, especially when your hands are shaking and your heart's hammering against your ribs. And once you're out, that gun isn't a weapon anymore. It's a paperweight. I checked my phone. Dead, of course. The power had been flickering for days before I blacked out, so there was no way to know if cell towers were even up anymore. But here's the thing nobody really talks about. Without power, your phone isn't just useless for calls. It's your flashlight, your map, your only way to check if anyone else is still alive out there. And now it was just a brick. I grabbed my respirator and strapped it on. The filter was still good, but for how long? Most people think these things last forever. They don't. Every single breath degrades the filter material, and once it's saturated, you're inhaling whatever's in the air. Could be smoke. Could be something much, much worse. I peered through the peephole. The hallway was dark, but I could make out shapes, looted apartments, shattered glass everywhere, and movement, slow, shuffling movement. That's another thing movies get completely wrong. They're not sprinting at you like Olympic athletes. They're slow but relentless, and they don't get tired. You do. And that's when I had to make a choice, stay put or move. Staying meant waiting for the food to run out. I had maybe 3 days of canned goods left, tops. But leaving meant stepping into that hallway full of things that wanted me dead, armed with one bullet and absolutely no backup. So I decided to scavenge the apartment first. Maybe I'd missed something. I found a half-empty water bottle wedged under the couch and chugged it. Dehydration kills faster than hunger, and I had no idea when I'd last had actual fluids. Then I hit the bathroom. The medicine cabinet had some expired painkillers and a roll of duct tape. Not exactly a first aid kit, but tape can seal wounds, fix gear, even reinforce doors if you need it to. The window was my next stop. I live on the 4th floor, so climbing down wasn't an option, not without rope, which I definitely didn't have. But the fire escape was right there. Rusted, creaky, but intact. That was my exit. The problem, the window was painted shut. Years of paint had sealed it completely. I could try breaking it, but glass is loud. And loud means drawing attention from every infected in a 5-block radius. I weighed my options. Break the window and risk bringing everything down on me, or find another way out. That's when I noticed the vents. Most apartments have them, but they're usually too small for a person to fit through. Mine was. Barely. I'm not claustrophobic, but the idea of squeezing into a dark metal tube with no idea where it led wasn't exactly comforting. I pried the cover off and shined my dying phone flashlight inside. Dust, cobwebs, and what looked like a straight shot to a maintenance shaft. No way to know if it led outside or just to another death trap, but it was better than the hallway. I grabbed my backpack, empty except for the duct tape and a protein bar I'd completely forgotten about, and took one last look around. This was it. Once I left, there was no coming back to this apartment. I crawled into the vent. The metal groaned under my weight, and for a second I thought it would collapse right there. But it held. The air was thick with dust, and every shuffle echoed through the shaft. That's the thing about survival. You're always one wrong move away from disaster. One slip, one cough, one too loud step, and it's all over. The vent led to a larger shaft, then to a service ladder. I climbed down, hands slick with sweat, until I hit solid ground. A basement. Dark, damp, and thankfully empty. But here's the problem with basements. They're great for hiding, but they're also labyrinths. No windows, no exits unless you know the layout. And I didn't. I could spend hours down here and still not find a way out. I moved slowly, keeping my breathing steady. The respirator made it harder, but the alternative was breathing whatever was down here. Then I heard it, a distant scraping sound. Not close, but not far enough. Something was down here with me. I froze. The sound stopped. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just pipes settling, or maybe it was something waiting for me to make a mistake. That's when I realized the real horror of all this. It's not the infected, it's the isolation. The knowledge that every decision is yours alone and every mistake is permanent. I took a breath and kept moving, because stopping wasn't an option. Survival horror narration script Zombie Outbreak, Day 1, Downtown NYC. I knew something was wrong when the sirens didn't stop. Not the usual New York noise, this was different. No cops, no ambulances, just a steady scream of alarms from every direction. And the streets, way too quiet for a Thursday afternoon. I had one bullet left in my sidearm and a respirator that was already down to 70% filtration. Not ideal, but I didn't have a choice. I needed food, water, and intel fast. The news had gone dark overnight, and my last text from my brother was just 2 words, "Don't go outside." Too late for that. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not rotting flesh, not yet, just the sharp, sour stink of garbage left out too long. The city hadn't been picked up in days. Trash bags split open, spilling onto the sidewalk. But here's the problem. No rats. Not a single one. That's when I realized, if even the rats were hiding, something was hunting. I moved slow, sticking to walls, checking reflections in store windows. Most apocalypse movies never show how exhausting this is. Every step feels like a gamble. Do you run and risk drawing attention, or walk and risk getting cornered? I chose the middle, fast but quiet, like I was late for work but didn't want my boss to notice. Then I saw the first body. Not a zombie, not yet. Just a guy in a delivery uniform, slumped against a fire hydrant. No visible wounds. His face was gray, lips tinged blue. I didn't touch him, but I didn't need to. The way his fingers were curled, the stiffness. He hadn't died naturally. Something had done this to him. I kept moving. The respirator made my breath sound loud in my ears, and the headache wasn't helping. I needed water, but all the bodgas were either looted or locked down. That's another thing nobody talks about, how fast the supply chain collapses. One day you're grabbing a Snickers at the register, the next, you're kicking indoors for a warm can of soda. I turned a corner and froze. A group of people, or what used to be people, were shuffling down the middle of the street. Not Romero slow, not 28 days later fast, just deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. Their clothes were dirty but intact. No blood, no bites. That was the worst part. They didn't look dead. They looked sick. I ducked into an alley. 1 bullet. That's all I had. And if these things were contagious, a gunshot would be a dinner bell for every infected in a 5-block radius. The alley was a mistake. Dead end. A dumpster, a fire escape too high to reach, and a door with a broken handle. I could hear them behind me now, that wet, ragged breathing. No growling, no moaning, just the sound of air being dragged through ruined lungs. I turned, 3 of them, close enough to see the veins in their eyes, black and branching like cracks in glass. They didn't lunge, they just reached. Here's the thing about panic, it's not the screaming, flailing mess you see in movies. It's cold. It's your brain clicking through options like a malfunctioning vending machine. Fight. 1 bullet. Flight. Nowhere to go. Hide. Too late. I sidestepped the first one, and it overbalanced. That was my first clue. Their coordination was shot. The second grabbed my jacket, but the material ripped clean off. I didn't wait to see how long that bought me. I sprinted for the dumpster, climbed, and hauled myself onto the fire escape just as fingers brushed my shoe. Safe. For now. But here's the problem. I was trapped. The fire escape led to a roof, but rooftops don't have supplies. And my respirator filter was ticking down, 69%, 68% with every breath. I could see more of them in the street below, drawn by the noise. That's when I noticed the pigeons. They were everywhere, perched on ledges, watching, not flying away, not scared, just waiting. And that's when it hit me. If this thing could jump from humans to rats to birds, we were already extinct. We just didn't know it yet. I pulled out my phone. No signal, but the time still showed. 4:18 p.m. Day one, and the sun was going down. That's the part that never gets shown in the movies, how dark a city gets when the power fails. Not cinematic shadows, not moody streetlights, just pure, suffocating blackness. And somewhere in it, things that used to be people learning how to hunt. I had until sunset to find shelter, and I still didn't have any water. I remember thinking the worst part of looting a convenience store would be the guilt. Turns out I was wrong. The worst part was realizing the entire store had already been picked clean, except for the Twinkies. Nobody was desperate enough for Twinkies yet. Mara and I moved through the aisles like ghosts, trying not to make noise. The shelves were a graveyard of empty wrappers and shattered glass. The only things left were the kind of junk nobody wants when the world ends. Cat food, expired protein bars, and a single can of off-brand soda. I grabbed the soda. It was warm, but at that point, I would have drunk motor oil if it had calories. Here's the problem. Nobody tells you how fast stores get stripped bare. In movies, survivors always stumble onto some untouched Walmart with fully stocked aisles. Reality. By the time you realize you need supplies, everyone else already had the same idea. And the ones who got there first weren't exactly leaving Yelp reviews about what was left. Mara pointed to the back room. Employees only. That's where the good stuff would be, if there was any left. We pried the door open with a crowbar, and that's when we heard it. A low, wet groan from somewhere behind the counter. That sound changes everything. You stop thinking about food. You stop thinking about thirst. Your brain narrows down to one question. Is it between us and the exit? It was. The thing that used to be the cashier was slumped against the register, but it wasn't dead. Its head snapped up when the door creaked. The skin around its mouth was split, like it had been chewing on something too hard, and it was staring right at us. Most apocalypse movies never show this part, the way you freeze, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief. Your brain refuses to accept that something that broken can still move, but it does. And by the time you process that, it's already lurching toward you. I had one bullet left in my sidearm. One, and I wasn't about to waste it on a single target when there could be more outside. Mara grabbed my arm and yanked me backward just as the thing lunged. We bolted for the exit, but here's what nobody talks about. Running in a panic is loud, and noise attracts more of them. We made it to the street just as two more rounded the corner. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, but fast. Too fast. I'd always assumed they'd shamble like in the movies. Nope, these things hunted. We sprinted down an alley, and that's when I realized my respirator was slipping. The filter was already at 70%, and every gasp of air made it worse. The stench hit me full force, rotting garbage, something acidic, and underneath it all, that sweet, sickly smell of decay. I gagged, but there was no time to adjust the mask. Mara spotted a fire escape. We climbed, our hands slipping on the rusted metal. The things followed, but they couldn't figure out the ladder. That bought us maybe 30 seconds. 30 seconds to realize we just trapped ourselves on a roof with no way down. And here's the next problem. Rooftops aren't safe. They're just high enough to make you think you're safe. But all it takes is one of them figuring out how to climb, or worse, you getting cornered with nowhere to run. We jumped to the next building, barely making the gap. My knees screamed on impact, but the alternative was worse. Behind us, one of the things tried to follow and fell. It didn't stop moving, just kept crawling toward us, its legs bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. That's when I noticed the backpack was gone. I must have dropped it during the climb. Inside was the last of our water, half the food we'd scrounged, and most importantly, the only map we had of safe zones. Gone. That's the irreversible part. You don't get second chances with supplies. Every loss is permanent. Every mistake stacks. And now we were on a rooftop, exhausted, with nothing but a warm soda and one bullet between us. But here's what's worse. The sun was going down. And nobody survives the first night without shelter. YouTube survival horror narration script zombie outbreak. I didn't realize how bad the headache was until we stopped moving. That's the thing about adrenaline. It doesn't just mask fear, it masks pain. But the second Mara and I barricaded ourselves in that abandoned office building, everything hit me at once. The throbbing behind my eyes, the way my hands shook when I tried to unscrew the cap of that warm, off-brand soda. I remember thinking, this is what dehydration feels like. The office was a mess. Chairs flipped over, papers everywhere, like everyone just got up and ran. No bodies, though. That was the weird part. Most places we'd passed had at least one. But here, Nothing. Just the sharp, sour stink of garbage and the distant sound of car alarms that never stopped. Mara found a vending machine someone had already smashed open. All that was left was a single pack of Twinkies. We split it. I know what you're thinking, Twinkies in an apocalypse. Yeah, real original. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Sugar crashes hit twice as hard when you're running on no sleep and pure terror. We were on day 2. 2 days since the city went dark. 2 days since the last broadcast told us don't go outside. And yet, there we were, because staying inside wasn't an option anymore. That's when we heard the rumor. Mara had this busted-up walkie-talkie she'd scavenged from a cop car. Most channels were static, but then we caught a transmission, broken, cutting in and out. Something about a government convoy, a rescue operation. Downtown. I should have known better. But after 2 days of running, of seeing things I still can't put into words, you cling to anything, even a ghost of a chance. The problem, downtown was a war zone. We could see it from the office window, smoke rising in columns, streets littered with abandoned cars. And the worst part, it was too quiet. No gunfire, no screams, just those damn car alarms. Mara wanted to go, right then. She still had this hope in her eyes, like maybe this was it, the way out. But I'd been counting our supplies. 1 bullet left in my sidearm. A respirator with a filter that was already 70% used up. And now, half a pack of Twinkies between us. That's when I realized something most apocalypse movies never show. Hope is dangerous. It makes you reckless. I told Mara we should wait, scout the route first. Maybe find more supplies, but she wasn't hearing it. She kept saying, what if this is our only shot? And that's the other thing nobody talks about, how fast trust erodes when the world falls apart. 2 days ago, Mara was my best friend. Now, I was calculating whether I could outrun her if things went south. We compromised. We'd wait until nightfall, move under cover of darkness. Big mistake. Because here's what I didn't account for. They were more active at night. We'd seen them during the day, slow, shambling, almost manageable if you kept your distance. But at night, something changed. Maybe it was the cooler air. Maybe they could smell us better. I don't know. But the few we'd spotted through the window moved differently. Faster, more deliberate. I tried to sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about that 1 bullet. 1 shot. What happened if there were 2 of them? 3. Mara didn't sleep either. She sat by the window, staring at the smoke over downtown like it was some kind of beacon. That's when the second transmission came. Same broken voice. Same promise of rescue. But this time there was a new detail, a street intersection. A time, tomorrow at dawn. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a rescue. It was a trap. Think about it. Why would the government broadcast their location over an open channel? Why give a time? Unless they wanted to draw people out. Unless they weren't the government at all. Mara didn't believe me. She said I was paranoid. That I was letting fear make decisions for me. Maybe she was right. But here's the thing about paranoia in an apocalypse. It keeps you alive. I didn't tell her my other theory. The worse one. That maybe the convoy was real. But not for rescue. I'd read enough history to know what happens when a city falls. Quarantine zones. Containment. And if that failed, cleanup. Dawn was 6 hours away. Mara was already packing her bag. I had 1 bullet, a splitting headache, and a decision to make. Worst part, I already knew what I was going to do. And that's the moment I realized the zombies weren't the only monsters in this story. I knew something was wrong the second I saw that convoy roll into downtown. Now, military presence made sense. We'd been expecting rescue or containment or whatever euphemism they'd use for it. But this wasn't right. The Humvees moved too slow, too deliberate, like they weren't in any particular hurry to save anyone, like they were clocking in for a shift, not responding to a crisis. Mara dug her nails into my arm. "They're stopping," she whispered, and that's when the real warning bells started going off, because these soldiers weren't checking ID or scanning for injuries. They just stood there, rifles loose in their hands, watching the crowd swell around them. And that's when I caught the red crosses painted on their sleeves, not on white backgrounds, just stark crimson crosses on dark fabric. These weren't medics. This was quarantine. You never see this part in the movies, how fast desperation curdles into violence when people realize the cavalry isn't here to save them. The crowd surged forward, a wave of screaming, begging bodies shoving toward the trucks. The soldiers didn't even flinch. One of them raised a hand, and that's when I saw it, a syringe glinting in the sunlight. I yanked Mara backward. Run! She hesitated, barely a second, but it was enough. The first gunshot cracked the air, and everything detonated. Someone slammed into me hard enough to knock the wind out, and suddenly Mara's hand was gone, swallowed by the chaos. I shouted her name, but sirens drowned me out. The soldiers were firing into the air now, not at people, but the effect was the same, herding us toward those trucks like cattle. I checked my sidearm. One bullet left. Not enough to fight. Not even enough to bluff, so I ran. The streets had gone quiet, not the peaceful kind, but that heavy silence where you know something's watching. Trash bags were piled shoulder-high on sidewalks, rotting in the heat. The sour stench of garbage mixed with something sharper, almost chemical, like bleach and burnt plastic. I ducked into an alley, pressing my back against rough brick to catch my breath. My head was pounding, my mouth so dry I could barely swallow. I cracked open the warm soda from my pack and forced myself to sip it slowly. Chugging would just make me puke, and I couldn't afford to lose those calories. That's when I heard footsteps. Not the shambling dead, not yet. People, 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, crept into the alley entrance. No military gear, just survivors. But the way they moved, scanning the ground, checking corners, they weren't looking for help. They were hunting. I froze. One wrong move, and they'd hear me. The woman crouched, picking something off the pavement, a candy wrapper. She held it up and the 3 of them exchanged a look. Someone had been here recently. That's the thing nobody tells you about Collapse. Hunger turns everyone into a predator eventually. Empty stomachs don't care about your moral code. I eased backward, step by silent step, until my heel hit a loose bottle. It didn't shatter, but the clatter was enough. All 3 heads snapped toward me at once. I bolted. Gunfire echoed behind me, but I didn't stop. I wove through alleys, jumping dumpsters, skidding around corners until my lungs burned and my vision blurred at the edges. Stopping meant death. Simple as that. Finally, I ducked into a boarded-up bodega, kicking the door shut behind me. The place had been cleaned out. No food, no water, just broken glass and the rancid stench of spoiled milk. I crouched behind the counter, listening. No footsteps, no voices. For now, I was safe. But Mara wasn't. I kept replaying that moment, her hand slipping from mine, the crowd pulling her under. I should have held on tighter, should have fought harder. But should have doesn't count for much in an apocalypse. I checked my respirator. Filter at 70%, but the air outside was getting worse. Every breath tasted like smoke and something metallic, not blood, something industrial. Like the city itself was rotting from the inside out. I tore open the Twinkies and forced myself to eat half. The sugar hit my system like a jolt, sharpening my thoughts. I needed water, needed intel, needed to know if the military was actually rounding people up or just executing them, and I needed to find Mara. But here's the problem. Going back meant walking straight into a trap. Staying put meant starving, and waiting too long meant the infected would start venturing out in daylight. I peered through a crack in the boarded-up window. The streets were empty now. No soldiers, no survivors, just trash blowing in the wind. That was almost worse, because the quiet never lasts. I knew the subway tunnels were a bad idea. Everyone knows they're a bad idea. But by day 4, I didn't have a choice. The streets were too quiet, and quiet is worse than noise when the world's falling apart. I'd been holed up in a bodega for 2 days, rationing a warm can of soda and a pack of Twinkies, but the military broadcasts kept saying, "Don't go outside." So, I went underground. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't just the usual subway stink. It was sharper, sour, like garbage left out too long. The second thing was the noise. Alarms were blaring somewhere, echoing through the tunnels, and there were these distant murmurs that could have been voices or something else. I didn't want to think about what else. I had my respirator on, but the filter was at 70%, and I didn't know how long it would last. That's the thing nobody talks about. How fast supplies degrade when you're counting on them. I also had my sidearm, but only 1 live round left. 1. That's not a gun, that's a last resort. I kept it holstered because pulling it out would have just reminded me how screwed I was. The tunnels were dark, but not pitch black. Emergency lights were still on, flickering in some spots, casting these weird shadows that made me second-guess every corner. I was moving slow, trying to stay quiet, but my boots kept crunching on broken glass and debris. Every sound felt like a beacon. And then I heard it, voices. Real ones, not the murmurs. They were coming from up ahead near one of the platforms. Here's the problem. Survivors can be just as dangerous as the infected. I didn't know who these people were or what they wanted, but I was out of food, out of water, and out of options. So I crept closer, trying to get a look before they noticed me. There were 5 of them, 3 men, 2 women, huddled around a makeshift campfire. They had backpacks, weapons, and what looked like a decent stash of supplies. One of the guys was holding a map, and they were arguing in hushed tones about something. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught the words safe zone and military checkpoint. That got my attention. But here's the thing. Safe zones aren't safe. Not anymore. The military had been pulling out of the city for days, and the checkpoints were either abandoned or overrun. These people were planning a death march, and they didn't even know it. I had to decide whether to warn them or keep moving. I stepped out of the shadows, hands up, trying to look harmless. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'm not a threat. I just need water." They all froze, and the guy with the map reached for his gun. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped. "Alex," I said. "I've been hiding in the Bodger on 5th. Ran out of supplies." One of the women, short hair, tired eyes, nodded toward my respirator. "What's with the mask? You sick?" "No," I said quickly. "It's just the air down here isn't great. You should be wearing something too." They exchanged glances, and I could tell they didn't trust me. Honestly, I wouldn't have trusted me either. But the woman with the short hair stepped forward and handed me a bottle of water. "Drink," she said. "But don't get comfortable. We're leaving soon." I took the water and gulped it down, trying not to think about how long it had been since I'd had something cold. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Military checkpoint on the edge of the city," the guy with the map said. "Supposed to be a safe zone." I hesitated. "You sure about that? I've been hearing things." "What kind of things?" the woman asked. "That the military's pulling out," I said. "The checkpoints are either gone or swarmed. It's not safe." The guy with the map shook his head. "We don't have a choice. Staying here isn't an option." He was right about that. The tunnels were a death trap, too many blind corners, too many places for the infected to hide. But the streets weren't much better. That's the thing most apocalypse movies never show. There's no good option. Every choice is a gamble, and the odds keep getting worse. I didn't know what to do. Joining them meant trusting strangers with my life, but going solo meant running out of supplies even faster. And that's when I noticed something. One of the men was coughing, not a normal cough, but that deep, wet sound that makes your stomach drop. I took a step back, my hand instinctively going to my respirator. "Is he sick?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. The woman shook her head. "It's just a cold. He's fine." But I wasn't convinced. That's the other thing nobody talks about, how fast sickness spreads when you're living in close quarters. One person gets infected, and suddenly the whole group is at risk. I didn't know if he was sick or just had a cold, but I couldn't take the chance. "I'll catch up with you later," I said, backing away. Good luck. They didn't try to stop me, but I could feel their eyes on me as I disappeared into the shadows. I didn't know where I was going or what I'd do next, but staying with them wasn't an option. That's the reality of survival. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that keep you alive, even if they leave you alone. Day 5. That's the day I stopped worrying about the infected and started worrying about the man leading us. I was digging through a pile of abandoned bags in the subway tunnels, looking for anything useful: batteries, medicine, a sealed water bottle. My hand brushed against something stiff in the side pocket of our leader's pack. It was a crumpled sheet of notebook paper. I pulled it out. Names were written on it, and most of them were crossed out in red pen. Some I recognized immediately, people we'd lost to the outbreak in the first week. But others were people who had been with us yesterday, people who'd eaten breakfast with us that morning. That's when the pattern clicked. Every crossed-out name belonged to someone who had questioned him, someone who'd argued about the food rationing, or suggested we take a different route, or just talked too much when he wanted silence. And at the very bottom of the list, written in fresh, dark ink, was my name. You know, all those apocalypse movies get it wrong. They make you think the real threat is the dead, the shambling hordes in the dark. But the real danger is the living, the people who get to decide who's expendable. My first instinct was to just walk away, to grab my bag and slip into the tunnels and take my chances alone. But here's the issue. The tunnels weren't empty. Every exit we'd scouted was either blocked by debris or swarming with infected. Our group, as messed up as it was the only thing standing between me and becoming another ghost in the darkness. So I did the only thing I could. I folded the paper, shoved it back into his bag, and pretended I'd never seen it. I kept my mouth shut, my head down. But that created a new problem. Now I was living on borrowed time. I had to watch every word, every glance, every tired sigh. One wrong move and I'd be the next one to volunteer for a solo supply run. The kind nobody comes back from. The next few hours were a masterclass in forced normalcy. We divvied up the last of our food, a lukewarm can of off-brand soda and a pack of Twinkies that tasted like chemicals and regret. I made sure to take the smallest share. No complaints, no eye contact, just quiet compliance. Then Mark, our leader, called us all together. He said he'd picked up a military broadcast on his shortwave. A safe zone, he claimed, 3 miles north, but there was a catch. To get there, we'd have to cross a half-mile of open highway. No cover, no fallback position, just us exposed under the sky. It sounded like a death sentence. And that's when I realized that was exactly the point. He wasn't trying to lead us to safety. He was thinning the herd. I glanced around at the others. Some of them were nodding, too exhausted to think it through. Others looked uneasy, but they kept their mouths shut. And then there was Jess. She was the only one who ever really pushed back, who wasn't afraid to call him out. She was staring at Mark, her expression sharp, like she could see right through the lie he was telling. And in that moment, I knew. If anyone was getting crossed off that list tonight, it was her. I had 1 live round left in my sidearm. 1, not enough to fight my way out of the tunnels. Not enough to protect anyone else. Just enough for one desperate, stupid play. I waited until Mark stepped away to scout ahead, which I'm pretty sure was code for setting up an ambush. I pulled Jess aside, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't say a word. I just showed her the list. Her face didn't change. No shock. No anger. Just this cold, grim recognition, like she'd been waiting for this. "We're not the first group he's done this to," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant drip of water in the tunnels. That's when I heard it. A sound from down the tunnel, not the moaning of the infected. Footsteps, deliberate, coming back. Mark was returning. Jess grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "There's another way out," she said quickly. "A maintenance shaft near the old platform, but we have to go. Right now." That sounded like a lifeline, until you processed what it really meant. Abandoning the others, letting them walk right into Mark's trap. But here's the ugly truth nobody likes to admit. Survival isn't about heroics. It's about brutal, cold-blooded math. I had 1 bullet, no supplies, and a leader who had already signed my death warrant. The numbers didn't look good. I looked at Jess. I nodded. We slipped into the deeper shadows just as Mark's flashlight beam cut through the gloom of the station. He called my name. Once. Then again, louder. Then angry. The last thing I heard before the tunnel swallowed us whole was his voice, calm and collected, telling the rest of the group they must have gotten grabbed by one of them. We move now. And just like that, I went from being a name on his kill list to being another convenient excuse to rush everyone into the open. The maintenance shaft was pitch black, and it stank of mildew and something sour, like old garbage. Jess led the way, the sound of her breathing loud in the confined space. My respirator filter was down to 70%, good enough for now, but it wouldn't last forever. We climbed for what felt like hours, our muscles screaming, until we finally hit a metal grate. Fresh air, the night sky, and in the distance, the faint pop of gunfire from the highway. I didn't look back, because here's the worst part. In a world like this, betrayal doesn't just end when you escape. It follows you. Mark knew these tunnels. He knew the routes, the hiding spots, how to survive in the dark. And if he made it out of that ambush alive, he'd come hunting. Viral YouTube survival horror narration script. I knew something was wrong the second I turned the key in my apartment door. It was day 7, and by then I'd learned that silence wasn't just unsettling, it was a warning. The lock clicked too loud, like the whole building was holding its breath. I pushed the door open slow, sidearm raised. 1 live round left. 1. That's the kind of math that makes your hands shake. The apartment looked normal, too normal. My couch, my TV, my half-eaten takeout from a week ago still on the coffee table. But the air smelled stale, like nobody had breathed it in days. Here's the problem. I'd left in a hurry when the military started rounding people up. No time to grab anything but the essentials. Now, coming back felt like walking into a tomb, my own tomb. I moved to the kitchen first, because water trumped safety at that point. The faucet sputtered, then nothing. Of course, the city had shut it off. I wrenched open the fridge, and the smell hit me, rotting food, warm milk, the kind of stench that sticks to your clothes. But there in the back was a single warm can of off-brand soda. I cracked it open and drank it like it was the last liquid on earth. It tasted like battery acid, but I didn't care. That's when I heard the shuffle outside my door. Not a bang, not a scream, just movement, slow, dragging steps. I froze. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. Nobody should have been in the hallway. The building had been empty when I left. I pressed my ear to the door. The sound stopped. Then knocking, 3 soft taps. Human-like but off, too spaced out, too deliberate. Most apocalypse movies never show this part, the way your brain short-circuits when you're deciding whether to answer your own door. Because what's worse? Opening it to a threat, or never knowing what was on the other side. I didn't answer. The knocking stopped. Then, after a few seconds, the footsteps moved away. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and turned to my supplies. I had 1 pack of Twinkies left. 1, and a respirator with a filter that was probably more dust than protection by then. That's when the reality hit me. I couldn't stay here. The apartment was a death trap. No running water. No food worth risking. And now, something knew I was inside. But leaving meant going back into the streets, where the military was either shooting people on sight or disappearing them into quarantine zones. And the last message I'd gotten before my phone died was clear. Don't go outside. That sounds manageable until you realize how fast supplies run out. How quiet the world gets when there's nobody left to make noise. I checked the window. The street below was empty, but not in a peaceful way. Trash bags piled up where sanitation workers used to haul them away. A single abandoned car, doors wide open like someone had bolted mid-escape. And in the distance, the low hum of military trucks. I had to make a choice. Stay and starve or go out there and risk whatever was worse than starvation. Here's the thing nobody talks about. In a real collapse, the scariest part isn't the monsters. It's the math, the calculations. How many calories do I have left? How many bullets? How many steps can I take before my body gives out? I looked at my sidearm. 1 round, enough for 1 threat. Or if I was desperate enough, 1 way out. That's when I heard the second knock. Not at the door this time, at the window. I turned and there it was, a face, pressed against the glass. Pale, bloodshot eyes. Lips moving like it was trying to speak, but no sound came out. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared. Because here's the horrifying part. I recognized it. It was my neighbor. The quiet guy from 3B who always waved but never talked. Only now his jaw was hanging wrong, like it had been broken and reset at a sick angle. And his eyes, they weren't just bloodshot. They were wrong. He scratched at the glass. Not pounding, not frantic, just testing, like he was curious. And that's when I realized the worst part. He wasn't alone. Shadows moved in the hallway outside my door. More footsteps, more knocks, soft, patient. They weren't trying to break in. They were waiting for me to come out. I backed away, my mind racing. 1 bullet, no food, no water, and now no exit. That's the thing about the end of the world. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in stages. And by day 7, I was out of stages. I had 1 choice left, and I had to make it fast.